Today, we have a conference titled The Journey of 1,000 Miles and Other Musings. This seminar will touch on the lessons learned not only in engineering practice, but also through our life experiences, which shape our perspectives and set the road to our objectives. The presentation will comprises three parts. In part one, everyone has a vision of what their career will be. In part two, lessons learned outside of engineering. And in part three, a retrospective of our guest, more of 45 years as a client and owner dealing with consultants, and will give a perspective of what clients expect from their consultants and what defines a good project outcome. So our guest today is Mr. Roger Skirrow. He is a professional engineer graduated from the University of Alberta with a bachelor in civil engineering in 1982. He worked with small, mid-sized, larger consulting firms, returning to the University of Alberta to obtain a Master of Science in Geotechnical Engineering in 1996, after which he managed the Fort McMurray branch of a large consulting firm. Roger left consultancy when he took a position as the Director of Geotechnical Services at Alberta Transportation. In 1990, he developed the Alberta Transportation Geohazard Risk Assessment Program that assessed the and prioritized risk assessment plans for more than 250 geohazard sites across Alberta. In his role with Alberta Transportation, Roger's duties have evolved to include oversight of the Alberta Transportation Products List, as well as roadside development and utilities policies and standards development. He is a past president of the Geotechnical Society of Edmonton and a past Canadian Geotechnical Society Northern Alberta section representative. Roger was also chair of the Canadian Geotechnical Society Transportation, Geotechnique and Professional Practice Committee, and a past board of the director member with the Center of Transportation Engineering and Planning. His personal interests include mountaineering, kayaking, as well as astronomy and photography. So please join me welcoming Roger.
Thank you for the introduction, and thanks, Colin, for the invite to come and give a presentation today. I hope you'll find it entertaining. So the journey of 1,000 miles begins with one step. That's a Lao Tzu quote. Some of you may know, so I've added my twist to that. And as the introduction suggested, it's going to be a three-part presentation. First is my career path. Last September, I attended the civil engineering class of 1982 40-year anniversary, and we had a good chance to meet and kind of discuss how we got from where we all began and how we got to where we were now. And everyone had a different idea of success back then. And as your career path changes, your idea of what constitutes success will change. So I wanted to share my career path. I think you might find it interesting. It's not you know, heroic or anything. It's not really outstanding, but for me, it's quite interesting. Then I'll talk about actions and consequences, and that's what I do outside of work. So I do a fair bit of mountaineering. So I'm going to have a couple of examples of where mountaineering expeditions went a little sideways. And then I'll talk about client expectations. So in last year at Geo Calgary conference, the CGS conference in Calgary, I was part of a panel discussion. And my topic was, what 5 things do you want consultants to know as a client? So I was representing the clients on that. So I've shrunken that down to about 3 points for the interest of time. And since most of you, I think, will wind up working for consultants, hopefully you'll find that of interest as well. So part 1, coming out of high school. I had the option, of course, going to university or not going to university. This is all going to be a decision tree type of situation. Since both of my parents had master's degree, both in education. My sister had her bachelor's degree and was completing her master's degree in archaeology. And my brother was just starting his engineering degree. Not university wasn't an option. So going to university, because I had a strong family background in education, and I could go into education or engineering. And so in grade 12, I don't know if that's the same now, but in grade 12, we all had to go to our guidance counselor. So the first time I met the guy, grade 12, and he says, well, you've got pretty good marks in math, so the sciences or engineering would be probably a good way to go, but you've got better marks in English, so maybe you want to go into education, follow that path. So I chatted with him, and he was 50 something, holes in a sweater type of guy, and I asked, well, what path did you go? He said, well, I got an education degree. So the idea was not to be a guidance counselor, and I went on engineering. So in undergrad, there was a choice of civil engineering or not civil engineering. And at the time, I think some council of Canada said there was going to be a shortage of 10,000 civil engineering jobs in the next 5 years. So job prospects meant civil engineering. And really after first year, I didn't have much interest in electrical or mechanical, mining, or the other disciplines. So as a new grad, I'm getting the pop-up from the other group all the time. So like as it came down to here, again, maybe easier. Sorry about that. So coming a new grad, I could get a job, or let me to hold you in suspense. Or I could go back to school. I got married right out of undergrad. So the choice of going back to school to get an MBA, I had actually registered for an MBA, or go back from MSc wasn't an option. So I had to get a job. So my first job out of university, I wanted to work with Northwest Hydraulics. We'd done a class trip to their facilities, and I thought what they did was fascinating. I liked hydrology and hydrotechnical engineering. So I did have a job lined up with them at Christmas. In fact, all of us had several jobs lined up that Christmas. It was a buyer's market for that. Or I could not work with Northwest Hydraulics. And that time, the National Energy Program was just rolling out. And I don't know if you guys would know anything about the National Energy Program, but it was basically a national program that helped to moderate price fluctuations in the price of gas and energy across the country in response to different crises in the Middle East that had spiked oil prices in the 70s. So it was great for most of Canada, like for Ontario, kept nice even pricing. They could go about their industries, no problem. But for Alberta, it was a death toll. Like any chance of bringing in investment into a regulated energy environment was just not going to work for Alberta. So you see a lot of that sentiment today, right, with the federal government supposedly overstepping their bounds on provincial jurisdiction. So what that meant for all the new grads back in 1982 was we all lost our jobs. Anyone who had a job at Christmas, most of them did not have jobs by the time you graduated. So they had to get a different job. So at that time we're heading into into a recession. There's 12% unemployment, about 20% in the engineering field. You think inflation's bad now, it's like 12% back then. Mortgages were 14% and higher. So even if you graduated and got a job, it was a difficult time to graduate into. So I did wind up getting a job with a small firm called Curtis Engineering and Technology. testing, sorry, Curtis Engineering and Testing. So it was a Calgary-based company with a small branch office in Edmonton. So I worked out of the branch office in Edmonton. They're mostly materials testing. So it wasn't like a niche geotechnical firm that did really neat stuff. This was a, meat and potatoes type of shop. They did geotechnical work, lowballed all their prices so that they could get the materials tested work. So it wasn't an overly complex place to work. It was a place that, as a young engineer, you could go, you could be a jack of all trades, right? I got to write my own proposals, do my own drilling, do my own lab testing, write the reports, interact with clients. So it was a steep learning curve coming right out of school, but that's one of the benefits of working with a small company is you get to do everything. But it does have its limitations. Unfortunately, that company went bankrupt. About 2.5 years after I'd started work there, I went to work one day, picked up a company truck to go to a job site, and I thought I'd get it cleaned off because it was kind of muddy. So I stopped at the Hughes car wash on 51st Ave, and they locked me in. So they wouldn't let me take the truck out until Curtis paid back the 6 months of invoices he hadn't paid. So that was my first clue that we were in trouble. And we kept getting promises that, oh yeah, we're just a little short on our accounts receivable. You'll get paid next week, and it was next week and next week. So that went on for 2 months, and finally, the whole entire office quit en masse. So I could get a new job, or I could go back for my master's. By that time, I had a child, I had a house, and a 14% mortgage. I had to get a new job. So I quit on a Friday morning at about 10 o'clock, made some phone calls, went into Thurber's office that afternoon, and started work the next Monday. So I think in my entire 40-some year career, I've been technically unemployed 4 hours. So going to Thurber's office, this was when they were just off White Ave, Strathcona area. So I got to deal with, Thurber itself it's a middle-sized company, I would say. They deal with more complex geotechnical projects. It was a lot more interesting. Like at Curtis, I was the king of 8-meter boreholes, standpipes. And that's what I did a lot of. So going to Thurber, I had the opportunity to work either in the field or the office. And there was still a lot in the field that I needed to learn. So my choice was to work in the field. So, I got to go to about 3 months at the Old Man Dam doing packer testing. Got to go up to Holman Island in the high Arctic and do air track rotary investigations. And installed slope indicators and, piezometers and vibrating wire piezometers. So there was a lot for me to learn, and I was happy to do the field work. The issue was I was being taken away from home more and more. So that was stressful for my home environment. I had a second child by that time, so I really needed to be at home. So I had a discussion with the branch manager. I said, well, I'm gonna have to come out of the field. I can do office work. Well, they didn't have a lot in the office for me. So I had to leave Thurber at that point. Fortunately, I was getting along quite well with the manager at Thurber, and he made some phone calls for me. And I went over to Alberta Transportation. So we called the assistant director of geotechnical, the person who my counterpart would be now. And I went over there and gave my 2 weeks notice to Thurber and started work at Transportation. So a very congenial translation from one company to another. And Thurber did a lot of work for Transportation, so they were on good terms with them. So at this time, we're still looking at interest rates around 11%. Inflation's 6%. So it's comparable to kind of what it is now. And at Transportation, I I got to deal with these in-house interdisciplinary teams and learn about transportation engineering. So working with the bridge designers, people who did alignment studies and functional planning studies, helping, find good solutions to slope stability problems. I mean, this is interesting stuff. And I got to know how the Alberta transportation system worked inside and out, and how things actually were done, rather than the org chart. I mean, there's the org chart, and that's how things are actually done. The unfortunate thing was, after a few years, the fear of privatization came in. So starting in the late 90s, late 80s, spilling into the mid 90s, most of Alberta transportation was privatized. So all the maintenance crews were outsourced, all that work was outsourced. All of the design work was outsourced to consulting firms. The lab on 50th Street, we had a beautiful lab on 50th Street, traxels, drag shears, we could do anything we wanted to do. We could call up and have it done, with some very qualified staff down there. So all that was sold off, all the equipment was sold off. And the idea was that people would, you could stay or you could leave. I mean, obvious choices. The morale, I've never seen morale so low. Like, it was just a drag to come to work. Everyone, like, the idea was we were going to go from 2,700 people to 700. People would have to apply for their own job and compete against their other, peers to keep that job. And the people who probably had, let's say, the most value or the most experience left, like, they didn't want to be bothered with that. So they left and they joined consulting firms. So I got a phone call one day from a friend over at Hardy VBT, now Wood, saying, "How are things at transportation?" I said, they're dismal. They're just depressing. So how'd you like to come work for us? So I left, went to work for Hardy VBT, Agra, AMEC, Wood. And I had the option there of I could be a generalist, because I only had a bachelor's degree, so wasn't fully qualified to do the complex work apparently. Or I could develop a transportation portfolio, because at that time Hardy didn't really have such a thing. They didn't have anyone who was really conversant in transportation work and how that work got done. So I thought there was limited growth potential as a generalist. So I went on the transportation portfolio. So I got to have a pretty nice little client list with, the ISLs of the world, and they would contact Hardy and ask for me directly, so I could work on their projects. So the issue with that is the company grew and it grew, and it absorbed companies that did the work of the companies that I was trying to work with. So they didn't want that kind of competition, so they went elsewhere for their geotechnical services. And then it was providing services internally. And that, that was a rough patch, because it was just difficult to get things done. So I had the choice of going back to being a generalist or going for my master's degree. It's a common thing. And so I chatted with my manager at the time. He said, "Well, there is company supports for this. We can help you with going back for your master's." And there's this discussion I had with them when I started working there. So they offered to pay, at the time they paid for my tuition, a small amount for books, and a small stipend, a monthly stipend, like $350 a month. So I thought I had enough savings to last 2 years to get me through. It lasted about 6 months. So I had to find other employment options while I was at school, and there's not much you can do. I delivered Edmonton Journal newspapers. I had 3 routes, so I was up at 5 in the morning every morning delivering newspapers on 3 routes, and then going home, getting changed, and going to school. So, undergrad was a cakewalk. Master's was hard. Not so much the work at school, but the work around school because I had a wife, I had 2 kids, and still had a mortgage and car, and all these other payments to worry about. So I'm glad I did it because I mean there's definitely a glass ceiling in companies for people with bachelors, especially in geotechnical, as you try and move up. And I could see that was apparent. So unless I got my master's, I was going to probably go into like a different line of work. So when I came back to Wood after my master's, I had an opportunity to stay in the end office or to go to Fort McMurray and be the branch manager there. So I thought, well, that's a great experience. When I was a kid, my dad picked up the entire family and lived in Africa for 2 years. And he was an exchange teacher. And then we did it again and moved to Scotland for a year. So for a family, I thought, okay, it's not Scotland, it's not Africa, but Fort McMurray, how bad can that be? So in Fort McMurray, it was a different experience. I started there where I had a staff of 7. Within a year, I had a staff of 27. So we were doing lots of work at the oil sands plants, all sorts of pile inspection projects where they needed 20 inspectors tomorrow, sort of thing. So that was challenging for me. I mean, it wasn't so much challenging on the technical side, but on the management side, I mean, the HR issues were huge. People would leave to get 25 cents an hour more somewhere else. So, just keeping a staff and in Fort McMurray, I think it's probably still a bit like that today. So coming out of that, I made a 3-year commitment. They paid to move me up there. I bought a house in Abasand in Fort McMurray, townhouse. About 2 years in, my family rebelled, basically. They said, no, we don't like it here. We don't feel welcomed here. I guess in school, they were in high school at the time. There's the oil sands group clique, and then there's everybody else. And they were in the everybody else group. So for them, it was not a good time. For me, it was good. It was a really good experience for my career. But the family rules. So I left that. So I had a kind of a path within Wood down the management side. And but that was going to involve another year in McMurray. And so I was on a flight from Fort McMurray to Calgary, going up to Banff for a branch managers meeting. And I opened the Globe and Mail, and there was an ad for the director of geotechnical services at Alberta Transportation. I clipped up the ad, took it home, and just pondered about it for a month. And finally, my wife said, either apply or I'm throwing that away. So I applied, and I did get the job, and had to pay back my moving expenses to Wood, or prorated amount anyways. So at AT, I'm the director there now. I've been the director for 20 some years, and it's been a really good employer for me. Work-life balance is always difficult going through your career, and it was tough at the start at transportation because I still did a lot of traveling. I had a very small group, and we were starting our geohazards program, so I was on the road for a couple months of the year. Which was stressful at home. But I developed the geohazard risk management program, worked on all sorts of different standards and best management practices, got the erosion sediment control manual produced, co-wrote and produced. And now every so often as an organization, and you get more and more responsibilities, because they don't hire more people, they just redistribute the workload. So now I'm about half my time, or a little less than half, is actually spent on geotechnical work. The other half is spent on roadside development and utilities, and there's another half that's to do with materials and innovation and our products lists. So there's a lot of things that fall on my plate, which keeps me very busy, and that is the way I like it. I've had the opportunity to go into other positions, to go become executive director, to move to different ministries. But I'm just holding on to the technical interests. I mean, geotechnical is what I was trained to do. It's where my interests lie. And if you move to higher, you lose all connection with technical aspects. I mean, you're in the political realm, right? So that wasn't desirable for me. So I just stayed as the director. So that's pretty much how I got to where I am. If I'm going to give any lessons to take away, like take stretch opportunities when they come along. So get outside of your what you think is your box. Volunteer for opportunities. That's even better. Managers love it when people volunteer for opportunities. Be a lifelong learner. So like it took me 10 years, 8 years to get back to do my master's. And you know, I was almost done in 2, but then I had to go back to work. So that last 2 chapters of the thesis took 2 years to do. You know, kind of in the evenings or when you could sneak it in on a weekend. The geotechnical community is very small, particularly in Edmonton. You're going to bump into people from companies you worked for before all the time. So, you know, be respectful in your interactions with your peers, right? Because otherwise you'll have to duck into the washroom when they come in the room. So like it's you know, be respectful, be appreciative of the effort that people give. Don't burn bridges. Like so many times, like when I left Curtis and thought, well, I'll just, you know, complain and whine about it and take him to court. And, you know, it turned out later that I did get paid, and it wouldn't have been any different if I had complained. So save your energy for better things. And most importantly, homework balance. So I did wind up getting separated and divorced from my first wife. I've remarried since, but part of that was kind of an ongoing, you're away from home too much. My wife is trying to get her career started and going. And once the kids left home, it was kind of, okay, that's it. Let's move on. And so as you're going through and you're thinking about these opportunities, also think about your home work-life balance. So moving to part 2. Okay, behind. So in nature, there's no right or wrong. There's only consequences. There's one of these neighborhood park benches that I walk by every day. This is on the park bench, and it's true. Like it's true. So I'm going to talk about 2 different climbs I've done. Well, once to Cho'oyo in Tibet, and twice to Denali in Alaska. And I like this quote because in the end you won't remember that you spent the time you spent working in the office and mowing your lawn. Climb that goddamn mountain. And it's not specifically referring to a mountain. It's just get off the couch and do something. So on Saturday, I went to Abraham Lake and took pictures of the bubbles in Abraham Lake. So that's you know, rather than sit and wait for the Super Bowl. I don't know what was on the weekend, but you know, there's hundreds of different things around Alberta. Even you can do. You just have to be willing to do it. And the other one I like is Sir Edmund Hillary quote: "Don't have to be a fantastic hero to do certain things. Just be an ordinary chap, sufficiently motivated to reach challenging goals." So that's the perspective I've taken. The mountaineering I've done is not heroic, not meant to be heroic. For me, some of it was fairly epic, but it's not heroic. And it's just, it takes a lot of effort. So whenever I do these trips, there's a lot of planning involved. So the planning basically is you pick a target, you obtain all the information you can about that target, you set a schedule, you contact guides if you need guides. I've done guided trips and unguided trips. I like the unguided trips better. The next thing is preparation. So get your passports in order, decide how much money you want to carry with you. If there's old gear you want to use, make sure that it's in functioning order, or buy new gear. If you want to buy ultra light gear, that's the time, but you need to check it out, make sure it's going to work what you want. And then training is probably the biggest part of most of this. So getting physically trained and mentally trained. If you're going to do travel on glaciers, get crevice rescue training. Get your wilderness first aid training updated, things like that. And then practice. Like for mountaineering, you want to practice in the environment that you're going to be climbing in. So my brother and I do a lot of climbing together. So we go to the mountains all the time, and we do practice climbs in the mountain. And things like tying knots. Knots are very important to mountaineers. You should be able to tie the basic mountaineering knots with gloves on, blindfolded, right? And that's going to help you perform. I'm not going to talk about this too much, other than some of the climbs I've done have been very high. They're actually categorized as ultra high. And if you haven't been that high, there's things that happen to your body that you need to know about, or you'll panic. Like your rate and depth of breathing increase the higher you get. So you're breathing more frequently and gasping for breath. Your heart rate goes up, but the stroke volume goes down. Blood pressure increases. Most of your systems start to slow down just to support your breathing. So your food digestion rate goes way down. And not to be vulgar, but you might poop once every 3 days. Your appetite is suppressed. Everything tastes terrible. You probably throw up. And then you move into the conditions of acute mountain sickness. And almost everyone has some of these at some point on a high climb. So persistent headaches that just do not go away. Dizziness. I've not had distorted vision, but I've had difficulty concentrating for sure. Insomnia. I had sleep apnea. High mountain induced sleep apnea. And the worst you would get the HAPE, which is high altitude pulmonary edema, swelling of the brain, and high altitude cerebral edemas. That's the swelling of the brain. So it takes, I should say, it's not a technical presentation, it's one equation and one chart. So the equation is the time it takes to acclimatize is the height in kilometers times 11.4 days. So if you're going to Everest, 8.8 kilometers, you really need like 90 days to acclimatize. And no one takes 90 days. So you never get fully acclimatized. And even though that it's a plateau, so it doesn't plateau back at sea level accommodation. It plateaus at some level that's well below sea level. So just the reason for all this is because the oxygen as a percent of the oxygen at sea level decreases significantly as you go up in altitude. So looking at Edmonton, I'll talk about Whistler and Jasper Park a little bit. So even at Whistler, you're at about 75% of the oxygen content you'd have in Vancouver. And then going to Advanced Base Camp, Camp 1, 2, 3 in Cho'oyo to the summit of Cho'oyo, you're down around 35%. So you need sort of 3 breaths to get the same amount of oxygen you would at sea level, which is why your respiration rate goes so far up. And Denali's, it's pretty high, but it's, compared to the Himalayas or the Karakum, it's not that high. Training and practice, this is the Whistler hike in Jasper. So the red line is the tram, if you've ever taken the tram coming out of Jasper. This is, it's an ideal training hike. I love it. It's like 16.6K out and back. You climb 1,300 meters in elevation. And when you get to the point you can do this twice in one day, you're ready for almost anything. It's great to do in the summer. It's great to do in the winter. I've skied up there. I've snowshoed up there. So it's good practice. You can practice your winter skills, camp in the high altitude backcountry, melt your snow for your food and all that. So once you've gone through all that, then you're ready for an expedition. Cho'oyo is the 6th highest mountain in the world. Everest is 8,849 meters. About 310 people have died on Everest. So it's partly because it's a very popular mountain, of course. Cho'oyo is 8188, but 52 people have died on Cho'oyo. So it's not like it's a completely safe mountain. It's supposedly the easiest of the 8K mountains, but it's still pretty high. And just for interest, the smaller mountain, Barunsi, is like the 114th tallest mountain, and it's 7,162. So it's taller than anything in North America, anything in South America. And most of the high mountains are in Nepal and Tibet. So Cho'oyo was the objective. We wanted to do a high altitude climb that required the use of oxygen. We wanted the full expedition experience. And on the way, so you go to Kathmandu, then you drive from Kathmandu into Tibet over the Friendship Bridge. And along the way, you stop at tea houses and whatnot. And I took this picture in a tea house in Tibet. And this is Spirit Island on Maligne Lake in Jasper. Like how that gets to a wall in Tibet, I had no idea. But it was interesting. So all the way along this trip from pretty much Tibet to Cho'oyo, we kept encountering a guide and a single client. So Marty Schmidt was an American-New Zealand guide, and his client was Clifton Maloney, an American. So we would meet them at every tea house, it seemed like. And they'll come into the story later on. So this is a Chinese base camp. So you go to Chinese base camp or international base camp and check in with the Chinese authorities and get registered, and they assign you an agent that you never see again. But this is just the view outside the tent that morning. So a yak outside your tent. And so once you get to advanced base camp on a sunny day, this is the first look of Cho'oyo. And it's pretty intimidating. So the path up is basically that. You go from, about 800 meters up each increment, make your way from camp 1 to 2 to 3, and then to the summit. And there's two technical areas, and that's the one that we'll be talking about later. So the idea is to do these types of climbs, you need to acclimatize. So you climb up, climb to camp 1. This is camp 1 from base camp. Stay there in the afternoon, go back down. Stay a day in base camp. Next day, you go up to camp 1, camp overnight, then go back down. And then once you've done that, then you go to camp 2. So this is the way up to camp 2. There's the two of us just chilling. So you do that back and forth, and eventually you get to the summit. The summit of Cho'oyo is like a broad football field. It's wide and flat and very safe to be on. In the background, just to the left of me, is Mount Everest. Just to the left of that is Lhotse. So getting to the top was quite a struggle. You leave camp 3 at kind of midnight, climb through the night into the day, and you peak out about 1 o'clock-ish. Spend your 15 minutes at the top and head down. So my brother had a mask that didn't fit very well, so he wasn't getting as much oxygen as I was. So he was quite sick at the top. In fact, he threw up right on the prayer flags at the top. But I'm sure that happens. It was on the way down that I had my difficulties. So that steep part looked like this. I don't have a picture of it, so this is taken off the internet. But basically, as you're rounding that corner, you're traversing along a very steep snow-covered incline. And as I was going around that corner, my footing gave away and I slid. You're roped, so my instinct was to grab the rope, which I did, but I'm not even sure how it happened. But by the time I came to rest against, an ice anchor, my thumb had gotten squeezed into the ice anchor, and I was flipped upside down on my back with my pack, the full weight of me crushing my thumb that was stuck in the anchor. So, I credit the planning, the preparation and training and the practice to get me out of that situation, because I honestly did not panic. I thought, well, this is not good. How do I get out of this? And then my engineering kicked in. How do you work the problem, right? How do I get upright? I know if I do this, I'm going to lose my balance entirely. And if anyone else is clipping behind me, I'll pull them down too. So I yelled back to my brother, don't come, stay where you are. So he stayed around the corner. And it seemed like it took an eternity, but it probably took 5 minutes before I could get my feet underneath me and work my way back up to where the anchor was, so I could take the weight off and get my thumb out of there. So that was my experience on Cho'oyo. The guide had caught a cold the day before, so he got us to the summit and then he left. So he basically abandoned us on the summit. And we were a slow group, like we were an older group, so we were a slower group. So we were the last ones down the mountain. And this happened. And then, your adrenaline just spikes and your heart rate races. So by the time we got further down, the guy was disoriented. I thought we'd gone down the wrong way. We were in Nepal, not China. My brother just had to almost slap me, just so we're going the right way. Okay, I guess I believe you. So we were able to get down. So on the way down, you spend a very short stay at Camp 2, and then you go all the way down to base camp. So at base camp, there's a celebration for those of us who summited. And it was an international group, I think 8 people. They just cobbled together from around the world. You just put your name in there. They put together a group and do the support for it. So I am not feeling so good right there. I'm the person in the middle. So I'm hiding my hand, actually, because that's what it looks like. And it got progressively blacker as the days went on. But my day wasn't as bad as Clifton Maloney's day. He summited a little before us, and they went down to Camp 2 and stayed overnight. And when I talked with Marty, he said, we got up in the morning, and Clifton said, I just climbed the most beautiful mountain in the world. And then he went back to sleep and he never woke up. So here's a fellow that we'd gotten to know for 4 weeks and, gotten to be good friends with. And it turns out he actually was quite an important person that he didn't let on about. He was a senior VP at Goldman Sachs. He had his own investment company. His wife was a senator. And the porters, or the high altitude climbers, wouldn't go back up and get his body unless they were paid $1,500. And he only had $50 in his pocket. So a multi-millionaire only carries $50. His guide had slightly more than that, but not enough cash. So my brother and I actually footed the $1,500 to get Clifton Maloney's body down the mountain. And we did get paid back a little later with a thank you from his widow. But, this happens, right? And Clifton was 71. So he was doing this as his right to climb Everest. So he never quite made it. He summited all the other 7 summits of the world, but had 1 left to go. So my thumb was bad, but it wasn't as bad as this. So part 2, Denali. So I've been on Denali twice. I've not summited either time. There's reasons for that. So 2011, I went on a snowshoe expedition, did most of the climbing in snowshoes. 2014, I went back on skis. Skis are much better, particularly on the way down. So from base camp to Camp 1 on the map, it's about 9 kilometers, takes about 11 hours to go. It's really, you go down from base camp off the Ruth Glacier. That's where the plane lands. So you land on a glacier. That's a pretty neat thing already. And then you climb about 100 meters to Camp 1, and then Camp 1 to Camp 2 is, it's a very short distance. It's only about 4.5 kilometers, but it takes about 8 hours. Only about 2.8 kilometers to the next camp. That takes 9 hours. And then to the top camp right before summit, that's about 4.5 kilometers. And that takes about 11 hours. And then to the summit is only another 4 kilometers, and it would normally take about 14 hours. So I've been to the high camp. I've not summited from there, no. So the plane ride in, if you're ever in Talkeetna in Alaska, and you want a pretty neat afternoon, you can hire a plane and fly out onto the glacier and actually walk on Ruth Glacier at the foot of Denali. But the trip out, I mean, it's just outstanding. You know, the types of ice formations you see. So I use sleds on Denali. So we went unsupported. You can go as a guided group, but you still have to pull your own sled. Like basically you've got about 70 or 80 pounds of gear. You carry about 30 and you pull about 50. Depending on whether you want real food or, you know, dehydrated food, or how much fuel you need to use. So that's a bit of an experience. So the first time we went was on snowshoes, and you just hook into basically little kids' toboggans and pull it up with ropes. And we found coming back down, well, that didn't work so well because the toboggans wanted to go ahead of you and they wanted to slide down the side of hills. So we rigged up, you know, brought polypropylene tubes with us that we could get a bit of stiffness so these would track a little better. So just coming into Camp 1, that's basically our setup in Camp 1. Denali's very windy. Whenever you set up a tent, you pretty much have to build a wind wall around it. There's all sorts of dangers on Denali. The path you can see to the left there, but there's all sorts of avalanches that come down that you need to be aware of, and you can't see it, but in the climbing season is basically May. So in May in Alaska, it's like 24 hours of sunlight. But the crevices are still filled. So if you get into July, into August, certainly, the snow bridges over the crevices start to get rotten, and it's quite a bit more dangerous. So most of the climbing is done in May. This is the 11K camp, looking up what they call Motorcycle Hill over to Squirrel Hill. So just past Squirrel Hill, there's a ridge go on. So that's part of the 6 lines there, so for safety. And once you get past that, you can look back to that 14K camp way down on the bottom there, and you can see some of those crevices that you have to walk past and avoid. At that, the circle is around what they call Windy Point, so that comes into play later in the story. So nearing the high camp, the 17K camp, and that's not the top of Denali. That's a kind of a false summit there. Once we got to the first expedition, it was a fellow from America, my brother and myself. So you have to give team names. So we were, I think, Can-Am 3, something like that. We set up our camp, and it snowed. Like it snowed for 5 days straight. So we were tent bound for 5 days and 5 nights, and it just saps your energy. Like every couple hours, someone's got to get out and bang the snow off the tent because it's going to collapse, and dig out all your equipment. And you know, so after 5 days of that, this is kind of the impression you had inside the tent. My brother on the right with a headache, and Mike, our American fellow, just zonked out, and he's a Top Gun. So is that Navy or Air Force? He's a former Top Gun, retired, and became a pilot with American Airlines. But he was just sapped. Like he was the Go Energizer Bunny coming up the hill. But after 5 days, stuck in a tent with 2 introverts, like he was just out. He said, "I'm done. Get me out of here." So, I mean, that was the experience, our first climbing experience, and we were just 1 day from the summit. So that was frustrating, but it was something we had planned and prepared for. So yeah, and just looking at the hill, like, so this is where we would go the next day. You make your way up that hill and walk along the ridge to the right, and then eventually you get to the summit. And you might be able to see some zigzags there. So that was a skier who'd gone up and, you know, cut a few lines coming down. The problem was that it triggered an avalanche. So they got booted off the mountain. Like at the 17K camp, there's a warden that stays up there full time. And they had shut down the top of the mountain for climbers and skiers until they could assess the dangers from avalanches and whatnot after we've had 5 days of snow. So they ignored that and went up and cut some lines and caused this avalanche. And right at the very bottom, you can see tents. So, I mean, it came very close to the people who were below that slope. That's where they got booted off the mountain. So they closed down the top of the mountain. They didn't know when it was going to open up. We were exhausted and we hadn't planned for that long of a stay at the summit. We really planned for about 3 days, right? A day to get, acclimatized, a day to climb, and a day to recover and then go down. So even the guided groups weren't going, like to get back up that slope, like it's probably waist deep snow. So if someone had to cut a trail, had to cut that first trail, it wasn't going to be us. And if the guided groups weren't going, I guess we weren't going either. So we abandoned our summit attempt. So my brother and I came back in 2014, about 3 years later. I guess to go back a step, when we were at Camp 2 in 2011, we bumped into Marty Smith, the guide from Cho'oyo. He had just climbed with his son. His son is named Denali. And they were coming down and they said, well, the weather's coming in. The best thing for you is to get as high as you can, as quick as you can before the weather hits and you're socked in. So that's what we did. And we took Marty's advice. And, I bumped into him again. I did a trip to New Zealand with my wife, and we stopped at their place and visited them. And then 2 years later in 2013, Marty and his son Denali were on K2, and they got wiped off the side of K2 by an avalanche. And they died as well. So, it's not a game with no risks. So this is where we cached, the second time back, this is where we cached the material, some food at Windy Corner. The idea is that you'd climb a little bit between the camps and you'd cache your food and whatever fuel you didn't need, so you didn't have to carry so much the next time. And it helped to acclimatize. And go back down the next day, you'd go past your cache to the camp, set up your tent, and the next day you'd come back to your cache and pick it up and go leapfrog forward. So that's our cache. That's what it looked like the day before. That's what it looked like the next day. So as we were climbing up, not even to Windy Point, we got hit by a storm, like winds that literally blew us off our feet. Like two guys, 200-pound guys with 40-pound packs blowing off their feet. So we got almost to Windy Corner and we thought, we're not even at the worst of this yet, because as soon as you get around the corner there, it all funnels in and hits you harder. So we huddled together, like we had to be about 3 inches apart to be able to hear each other. Said, well, we can't go up, we can't stay here, so we have to go down. So we made that decision to go down, and it was a good decision. We just took the wrong path. So as you're coming down off of Squirrel Hill, there's a ridge you need to stay to the left of. We couldn't see where the markers were, and we went to the right. And about an hour down that path, I heard this yell in front of me, and my brother had fallen in a crevice. So it's not that wide, like he had his arms out that stopped him from going all the way into the crevice. But obviously he's not going to be able to support himself like that for long. So we'd done the crevice training, the rescue training. I had my ice screw handy. It was already clipped to the line. So I tried to get it in there, but it was like an inch of ice and then rock. So not enough to get a grip, enough to get an anchor set. So I scrambled further uphill, found a big rock and just wrapped the rope around it. I said, you're stable. So he was able to swing around and self-rescue, which is great because I was completely exhausted. There was no way I was going to be able to pull him out of that hole. So we'd left camp about 8 that morning. We got back to camp about 3 a.m. the next day. And my brother was white. He was just in shock. So fortunately, someone else was up and they made soup while I set up the tent. And, we survived. But I look at the Garmin InReach tracks. We had a little satellite device with us afterwards. And yeah, I can see, okay, we went that way and we should have gone that way. Damn. But there's no way you can pull it out and see when you're getting buffeted by 100-kilometer-per-hour winds. So that was Denali. And that's just the next, we waited a couple of days, just relaxed and skied out. You ski all the way out in one day. It's a nice ski. It's wonderful. So plan well, but expect surprises. You really need to pay attention to your mostly training and practice. Great. Communication is important. You can be afraid of things, but you still need to act. Like sitting in the middle of a windstorm doing nothing is not going to make your situation better. You need to act. Know and accept limitations and count your blessings. So I do that every day. Part 3, we'll go through this quickly. So I condensed this down to 3. I knew the time would be tight. So know your client. This is the first aspect. Clients like things that are delivered on time, on task, and on budget. We don't like surprises. We like regular communication. We like to be updated frequently, but not irritatingly so. There's a difference between knowledgeable and not knowledgeable clients. So you can have a technical vocabulary shorthand with knowledgeable clients. You can talk to me about core pressure and deviatoric stresses and that, and I will understand what you're saying. You can't do that with the RM of Edson or something. So you need to tailor your communication to the level of knowledge of your client, because if you do it inversely, like talking to a knowledgeable client as if they're non-knowledgeable is irritating. Talking to a non-knowledgeable client in a knowledgeable way can be annoying as well. So you need to get to know your client, what their client organization is like, because the organization that the client works in is going to limit what he or she can do to facilitate the work that you are doing. So expecting to get responses on things the next day is maybe not realistic, but having a regular check-in time is probably more important. Meetings. So this is fundamental stuff. If there's no agenda, I don't go to a meeting. Like it's a waste of my time. The discussion gets so confusing and off topic that it's got to have a focus, got to have an agenda. You can bring items to the meeting, put them on the agenda, but it's got to be an agreed upon discussion. Keep on topic unless the client changes the topic. No ambushes, so no surprises. That you should have all the information required for the meeting distributed in advance of the meeting. Start the meeting on time, finish on time. I have to try and do that. The meeting room itself, if it's going to be an all-day meeting with 20 people, don't squeeze them into a room for 12 and expect to have a productive meeting. So just the long meetings, you need bio breaks. You need to have some refreshments available. And these days, you need a break so people can check their emails. It's very tough to go an entire 8-hour meeting without people looking at their phones and checking their emails and doing other work in the meeting, right? So you can say every hour, we're going to break for 5 minutes, everyone check their emails. And that does usually result in a more productive meeting. Reports. So mostly, I read hundreds of reports a year, and most of the reports are pretty good. So consultants should be proud of the work they do. I mean, it's a lot of thought, a lot of effort put into these reports. They do need to be concise. You got to remember, someone is going to have to read the reports, and someone has to read lots of these reports. So if you can say in one sentence what you're taking a paragraph to say, use the sentence. Like when I review reports, I don't often read the entire reports. I look at what the report's supposed to be about. I look at the boreholes, I look at the analysis, and then I look at the recommendations. So do the recommendations meet what I think is required? And then if they're a lot different, then I start looking closer at parameters that are used, assumptions that are made, right? And then I will ask you at meetings, why did you choose that parameter? What was your assumption based on? So be prepared. Your recommendations need to be actionable. Like you need to think as a contractor as well as a consultant. So if you're recommending a tow berm that goes out into a river, not going to happen, not these days. So you have to have recommendations that can actually be built, and think as a contractor. So how would he get his equipment in to put that tieback wall in? Like, is he going to have to cut the entire slope off to take the equipment in safely to do the work? And if he's going to do that, maybe we just take off the entire slide anyways. So, and I find that's the part that's often missing, the practical aspects of how you would build this, how you would build what you've designed. I think everyone can probably do slope to building analysis to more or less the same degree. You can all come up with lots of good ideas for stabilizing the slope, but then can it be built? The tone of the report is as important as the content. So if I read a report and says, if we don't fix this now, the road may wash away and someone will die. Like those sort of things should not be in the report. You can say more or less the same, but the tone of that means that that report will never get issued out of draft. It'll stay as a draft forever. Because as soon as it becomes final, it becomes FOIPable. So the general public could FOIP it, CTV could FOIP it, and they say, well, why aren't you fixing this? The consultant said it has to be fixed or people will die. So you have to be a little bit careful about the tone of the report, as well as the content. So insights, like when things goes wrong, when things aren't on time, not on budget, and there's surprises, well, communication suffers. Clients don't return your calls, they don't answer your emails. Discussions become arguments. Often consultants hold designs too tight. They're not willing to budge on what their design is. And word gets out that this is a difficult consultant to work with. So I'm just saying, when things go right, you answer those phone calls promptly. There's good communication, open communication. Long-term relationships grow and prosper. Clients will ask for you by name. Client input is accepted and valued, and you'll get repeat customers. So I think that's it. A little bit over. I apologize. A couple minutes. Okay. Thank you. So mountains running the family. That's my dad and my son. I took the picture.
Oh, thank you very much, Mr. Roger. Now we have the time for the questions. We are a little out of time, so we are going to ask you a favor. Please send us the questions as an email, and we are going to collect all the questions from the people that is in Zoom as well, and we'll let him know the questions.
You bet.
And that's the way. And finally, we have a little from the center, a little present for you.
Thank you.
I'm not sure if that works in the Himalaya, but at least here in Edmonton it works.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you very much. And see you after the reading week. Thank you.